Let's get to the Miami Dolphins, our preview for the 2023 Miami Dolphins. I remember this time last year talking on all these shows, and maybe it was on the show with Barnwell, we were talking about just the guys with the widest range of outcomes that season. Yeah. Tua was somebody we threw out there because the offense was just such a mystery box. We had no idea what it was going to look like. Mike McDaniel's taken over for the first time as a play caller. They trade for Tyreek Hill. The skill position group is comprised differently than the one in San Francisco. So what's it going to be? And the answer was a fucking fireworks show. Yeah. I mean, just one of the most explosive, electric offenses that we've seen in a really long time. And they were rolling for so much of the season. And then the train just gets derailed. Yeah. You have an injury to your quarterback, an injury to your left tackle. Even when Tua was playing, defenses adjusted and they weren't playing quite as well on offense. We've talked a little bit about this, but it is crazy just how different we conceive of the Dolphins now compared to the summer of 2022, and our expectations for the Dolphins in this offense now compared to what they were a year ago.
Yeah, I thought it'd be an interesting quirk, like, oh, wow, look at all that speed they got, but we'll see if that works. And now, like you said, fast forward to a year, we're doing the top 10 offensive show, and I felt like I spent 10 minutes apologizing for not having them up there.
So true. So true.
And because I really felt bad. This offense it's another cool thing is that all the twists and fingerprints that these coaches can put on the same kind of playbook. You just even brought up on the defensive example with McDermott and Frazier with the defense playbook with the Bills, but just even with the Shanahan playbook, that, Kubiak Shanahan playbook, what Mike McDaniel did with it, and just the different twists and different dials that he turned to make that offense his own because of what they had. You have Tua, who's accurate, gets the ball out quick, which is a bug and a feature, I think, with him. But then you also have, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and they leaned into it fully. They knew who their best players were. They knew what made that offense go. And they were like, let's just run plays that are really good for those guys. And let's just do it over and over and over and over. There's no where you're playing Madden, you're like, oh, that guy's got to get to 50 catches. Let's make sure we spam him. It's like, no, they knew those two guys. That's what made their offense go. And they had
got an insane target share. I mean, Tyreek Hill got over 30%. And I think as a team, both guys got like 60% of the total targets or something like that.
On SIS, insane. You could see like a pie chart where all the targets were going. And it's like Hill and Waddle, or just the two colors are just like over. They're going like half the pie, maybe more than half the pie.
It was more than half. It was absolutely more than half, which is crazy.
Probably near 60%. Yeah,
I think it was. I think it was like 61% or something wild like that. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You just don't see that very often. No, but they understood what they were. The problem was, and we could talk about this, biggest question about the offense ending of this season. Now, what do they have to be? Because defenses have adjusted. So for me, what is the counter to the counter for this Dolphins offense?
That's what I got. I said, what's the next step? What's the next thing that they do that we saw in December? What's their answer after an entire offseason? Looking at what defense did to them and what are they going to evolve to? What's their Charmander? Or no, shit, I just butchered that Pokemon analogy. What's their Charizard to the Charmander? I'm trying to remember what the second one was, but yeah, that just
Charmeleon, isn't that
Charmeleon?
Right?
Nice. Yeah. I didn't know you had that in you.
Look at me go.
Nice. I know. Yeah. What's the Charmeleon to their Charmander from last year? That's what I want to look at from this offense.
I hope it's better than that. I hope they get to that Charizard level. A lot of people in Miami are going to be pretty disappointed.
I didn't know you had Pokemon references in you. So that was great.
I don't go deep with them, but I did play some Pokemon back in the day.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. No, but I even looking at the numbers, and I watched a couple of games. The Bills game, the second half of the Chargers game are the best kind of maybe inklings of what they might do and for next year. And that was, separating the church and state of RPOs. And we've seen the Bills do this. We've seen the Chiefs do this over the last couple of years, is realizing what the limitations are to what they want to do, which is a lot of RPOs, and still sprinkling them in, but then having more of a straight run game and a straight pass game.
Yeah.
The thing last year, and it's a little bit of this, but some kind of misconception was, just run the cover two and press them, just run that and it gets it. It's that and running too high coverages, but it's also changing up the coverage looks. That's what was really befuddling Tua.
Too high coverages are not the answer, because if you give them free releases, they're just running into space. They were shredding teams. The biggest adjustment, I think, in the second half of the season, in that 4-game stretch we've talked about, where even when Tua was healthy, they were in the bottom quarter of the league in success rate, passing the football.
Yeah.
Teams were getting really aggressive with them at the line of scrimmage. You're seeing more press coverage. And I was talking to another coach about this. He said that teams are just packing the paint against them. So they were running these combo coverages where it'd be man on one side where they were pressing, and then they would drop the safeties down and kind of play these robber looks. So it was like a combo man zone coverage where you were able to be really physical with them and then make them throw the ball outside the numbers because you were packing in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
And that's what you saw the Chargers doing specifically.
Yes, they did. It was also because Tua he's a great pre-snap operator. He's really good at reading the coverages before the snap, and then post-snap is where he can fall apart. And that Chargers game was the example of it.
And if you mess up the timing as well, if you disrupt the timing and you get him off a little bit, and he can't just throw the ball on time in rhythm, it doesn't look nearly as good.
And we'll get to it. And the weakness of this offense is the offensive line. So if he has to hold the ball for a quarter more second, a half more second, it's a trickle down effect of bad. So it's like, the longer the play goes is worse for the Dolphins. They want plays to be over in 2 seconds. Like that ball wants to be out and get into one of their guys' hands. That's by design. And their defenses that gave them issues last year. Bengals, 49ers throughout the whole season. Bengals, 49ers, Chargers, Bills, Packers. Not only, some really good teams there, four playoff teams, and the Packers, who were pretty decent last year. All those teams ran the most kind of variation of coverages. 2-man sprinkled in there. All those teams ran the most 2-man against them. 2 quarters, cover 3, cover 6. If you look at the numbers, the PFF numbers, it was like they all had a nice uptick in those numbers, or a nice threshold that they all passed. And again, that just goes into what we're saying, is that changing up the looks, being more physical, and just making them hold on to the ball. That's what they don't want to do. And I think that's what defenses realize. So again, that's what I'm curious is how do they mitigate that? What's the next step?
Making them hold on to the ball and making them push the ball outside of the numbers, because even though he can be accurate and he can be going, he's playing on time,
that's not
you want to test his arm. You want to make him make those tough throws. And I think that's what defenses are going to do. So that's one element of it. Can we push the ball outside the numbers? And then can they run the ball more consistently? Being down there talking to people, it's like, well, what do you guys need to do based on the way the defense were playing against you? And the first thing was, we need to run the ball more consistently. They're so interesting because the way that the offense is comprised, they dictate advantageous run looks by design. So they ran 21 personnel on 43% of the early down snaps last year, which was the highest rate in the league, right? They faced 8-man boxes, 8 or more guys in the box, at the second lowest rate in the NFL, 26% of early downs.
I was just terrified.
And then you're playing with 21 and you're getting all these light boxes. So in theory, you should be able to dictate to the defense. You should be able to run the ball consistently. And there were times where they did run the ball pretty well, but can they do it over the course of the entire year? And can they stick with it? Can they just say, if you're going to give us this, we're just going to keep hammering you over and over and over again? That's not the sexiest answer. Like, it's not some crazy thing Mike McDaniel draws up to attack these defenses that teams have comprised against them. But I think it is something that they have to do a better job of, again, to kind of just find that rhythm and consistency against these sort of looks.
It makes it sustainable. It's when you're living off explosive plays, it can be alarming if you just don't have that baseline to just churn out efficient yards. And that week 15 Bills game is the one where I was like, I think they know this too. And like you said, you're just talking to guys.
They do know it.
Yeah, is when they went under center I formation, pound the rock, baby. And it was like, oh, there it is. Okay, you guys are already seeing this mid flow. And again, I've said this like 10 times on the show, but that's where I was like, hey, Mike McDaniel, like, good job. Like, good job just doing that on the fly. Like, way to go. Not that he needs any compliments from me, but it's just like, that was like interesting to see. And they were somewhat efficient running the ball last year, but they weren't very explosive running the ball as well. And like, you kind of want that with the cover 2 looks that you're getting, or 2 high looks. That's where the 3rd round pick comes into play. Like Devon Achane is like, he's juice all the way, and just complimenting him.
Well, Mostert has been at times in his career too, where it's just, if we get just out the gate and we're getting 40-yard runs because of some of these looks that we're getting, you have that speed that you can introduce into the equation.
It's a great element to add.
I was looking at, so 2 things about the way the teams are playing against and being a little bit more aggressive. It's hard to live that way against this team. They still can create a lot of explosive plays. And some of the games they played where the offense wasn't as successful, Chargers, getting into a couple of the Bills as well, there were some explosives they left on the field. There was a throw to Tyreek Hill in that Chargers game that got lost in the lights. Yeah. That's a touchdown if it doesn't get lost in the lights. Good call. If you want to be a little bit more aggressive to disrupt the timing, you're playing with fire. And so one of their bets, along with running the ball a little bit better, is if you want to play that way, we're going to get you in the end. We're still going to get enough big plays. So I think the variance of that and hitting a couple more of those over that 4-game stretch maybe we talk about that 4-game stretch a little bit differently if 1, 2, 3 plays go a little bit different.
This reminds me of a anecdote my dad was talking about actually a few weeks ago with having Randy Moss, was that everyone ran cover 2 every week. They couldn't use film week to week because it was just, they knew they weren't going to get what other teams were getting. So they knew they were getting cover 2 every week. So what they did, what they had to base the whole offense on, because you're not going to just let Randy Moss get washed out of a game because of a coverage, is they had one-word audibles that my dad said came from Denny Green beforehand, was one-word audibles that the entire offensive unit knew that if they got some blitz look that they scouted or some single high look that they knew was coming, they got into that look so they could go bombs away. This was the fake moon play against the Packers. That kind of was one. It was supposed to be like a run check that Dante didn't even check. He just signaled to Randy, like, run it. So everybody's running a run play and he just throws it up to Randy. But that's kind of because it was single coverage. And that's what I think this offense has to live in. It's like they might only get 5 or 6 chances at it, but they're going to take advantage of it. Like that. That's
if you hit 2 or 3 of those, it changes the complexion of the game.
You hit 2 50-yard bombs or 2 touchdowns. That's 14 points. That's a totally different game. That's the thing, is you might only get, as opposed to last year, you maybe got 15 of those and you only get 6. It's like, if you still hit 2 or 3, that's it. But it's just, that is the world that they have to live in now by their own design, which isn't the worst world to live in, because every defense going in every week is going to be terrified of them. But it's also just like you have to change the game. You have to change how they attack defenses, which is going to be really interesting.
You mentioned the offensive line. Last thing to talk about on the offense. Teron Armstead was carted off today. It seems like he's okay.
He's okay.
But, I mean, you take a deep breath because he's so important to this team. When he was off the field or when he was playing at less than 100% last year, you could feel it. And you can feel it especially because of everything else they have along the offensive line. It's unsettled. Austin Jackson, their right tackle, was a former first-round pick. He was hurt for most of last year. Liam Eichenberg, who was their starting left guard last year, he wasn't very good. No. Isaiah Wynn, who they signed in free agency, is fighting for that job. So theoretically,
he's battled injuries his whole career.
He's been hurt too.
Yeah.
So they just haven't been very good. They're banking on in-house development from these guys because the plan for them has been awful. They've had a different offensive coordinator and a different offensive line coach essentially their entire career. Talk about Austin Jackson and Liam Eichenberg.
Can't do that with the line. That's just like impossible.
It's been bad. Remember when one of the Rooneys or one of the Mars talking about Daniel Jones, we've done everything we could to screw him up. That's how the Dolphins offensive line plan has been over the last couple of years. So if you can have a little bit more, even though they do have a new offensive line coach this year, but at least it's the same system. At least it's the same voice at the top. It's the same general offensive philosophy. So can that combine with a little better health? Can we get better play up front over the course of the season? I think that's the set of bets they're making.
Sorry, this is so random. I looked at their coaching staff because I just wanted to look something up. And do you know Ricardo Allen is a offensive assistant for the Dolphins?
Good for Ricardo Allen.
Not even defense.
Rico.
Offense.
That's great.
Good for him.
That's
He's
great.
Awesome. One of my favorite players ever.
I loved talking to him. He was a safety on that 2015, 2016 Falcons team. Really smart, great personality. He was like a really fun guy to talk about football with. So that's really funny.
I know. Sorry. It was the first name I saw. I was like, hey.
Well, speaking of the coaching staff, let's talk about the defense. Biggest question that you have about the Miami Dolphins defense heading into this season.
How much can Fangio? That's really that's my question, I guess. It's I think we covered it. We did our coordinators in new places or new coordinators show. We do, what do we do? Quarterbacks in new places, coordinators in new places, whichever one we did. But the difference from what it couldn't be more drastic from what was the last couple of years under Flores.
It's crazy, man.
Defense coordinator last year, and then to Fangio now. Just, I mean, the one stat, and I'm just going to repeat it from that show, was going from cover 4 and cover 6. In 2021, the Broncos ran 30% of the time. They were in cover quarters or cover 6. The Dolphins last year ran that 2% of the time. And that's right then and there is just what you need to know about the difference of this team. And I think the other one was the blitz rates. Was the Dolphins blitz twice as frequently in 2022 as Fangio did. And
the box counts is another crazy one. So last year, the Dolphins played with 6 or fewer guys in the box on 32% of snaps. That was dead last in the league. Yeah. The gap between them and the team in 31st was the same as the gap between the 31st and the one in 22nd place. That's how big it was. They were so far away from every other team in terms of how often they were playing with 8 guys in the box and single high coverages compared to what they're going to do this year. The Broncos were almost at the other end of the spectrum. They led the league in light box rates when Fangio was there. So it's just such a huge departure in so many different ways for this group.
And usually when we have this drastic of a departure from scheme, usually on offense we talk about, but even on defense, you're kind of like, oh, how's this guy fit in? Oh, they have to bring in a whole bunch of reinforcements of their guys. And we're like, oh man, that guy's a backup. Why are you bringing him in? Their personnel actually makes a lot of sense for what they're going to run, especially up front.
Up front, nothing really changes.
Nothing.
So it was one of the things I wanted to ask when I was there. I talked to Jalen Phillips, a couple guys on the defensive coaching staff. And I was like, are the techniques any different? Like, what are you guys going to be doing differently up front? And they're like, not really. Like the language changes. So different stunts are called different things.
Yeah.
But for the most part, down to down, what we're being asked to do is pretty similar. So I think the transition is going to be pretty easy for the guys along the defensive line. The guys on the back end,
yeah,
that's a conversation.
That's Spanish and English right there. That actually makes a lot of sense now you're saying that, because especially the outside, what they ask of the outside linebackers is a lot of carryover, and then defensive line, they're still going to be, two gap and / gap and a half, however they want to go talk about that. But that makes a lot of sense actually. And then, but the back end, especially at safety. Just the difference is going from with Flores, which is a Belichick defense, what they were doing. I know he wasn't there last year, but it was his defense still.
Yeah, Josh Boyer was the defensive coordinator. They carried over those ideas. Yeah,
same stuff. Is so much what DB teaching there is they're going to run their one double coverage or their cover zero looks, and it's all about the rules of the formation. If we're one doubling number 10 here, okay, wherever he is, we have to change who's doubling, who travels, who goes where, who's on number 2, all those things. And that's the main thing that they have to learn with this coverage and with these defenses that the Fangio system runs. It's so much about, okay, there's the formation, but I'm on the back end and going like, okay, who rotates down? Am I kicking back? Who bumps over? Who's traveling if there's a motion? And yes, that sounds somewhat similar, but it's a different ask. And I think that's where it's just that I do like the personnel for it, but it is just, there's going to be some mental parts of that because they ask a lot, especially from the safety position.
I think there's a lot of checks in both of those systems. The checks are just different in the Fangio world than they are in the Belichick world. So learning those checks and kind of figuring out that flexibility, I think it's been a challenge for some of those guys. Not overwhelming, but I think definitely something they've had to work on. And the other element that I thought was interesting, we're talking about to a couple of the coaches about the safeties, is that holding the disguise is something that you have to work on if you've never really done it before. So the Dolphins are lining up in single high all the time last year. You don't have to hold any disguise. The disguise comes after the snap, where if you're in single high, you're like floating to some weird version of cover 2. Yeah. Now, if there's a motion, whatever thing is kind of moving in front of you, how long can you try to hang on to that shell to not give anything away? So that's been something that they've had to work on a little bit.
So funny you say that. Sorry, because I watched the preseason game against the Falcons. Not also just want to watch the Falcons offense a little bit just in case, but also just watching because the backup safeties are in, how quickly those guys rotated down when the motion happened. Because you could tell they're just terrified. They're like, okay, my check is this. Okay, I'm doing it. Like, the next step is then like you're saying, hold it, and then do it and not give away the quarterback. But as soon as the formation lined up, those safeties could not wait to get the answer right to the test. They're like, okay. When they're in 3-by-1, I have to do this. Okay, I got it. But you could see it on film. So it's funny hearing you say that. And then when I watched film of them this week, they saw the same exact thing.
Up front, they got a lot of really good players. Christian Wilkins is an excellent player. He's had some contract issues right now, but hopefully that's going to get figured out. We'll talk about Jalen Phillips a little bit later, but he's an ascending pass rusher. Bradley Chubb, obviously, is a really good player. Yep. Zach Sealer, another interior player for them, who I think is really underrated. He's fun to watch against the run. And then on the back end, Xavier Howard has obviously had a really nice career. Javon Holland, I think, has a chance to be a star within this defense. Yes. Justin Simmons' name was mentioned when I was talking about Javon Holland and what he could do within this group. Yeah. And so with Xavier Howard, it's interesting. I think it kind of speaks to the change that they're making. Xavier Howard's life was very hard over the last few years. When you're living in that man world, the demands on you as a corner consistently over the course of an entire game, entire season, especially when you've been banged up at times like he has, it's a lot. You're asking a lot of those guys. So the goal within this system is, can we just take the hard downs away from everybody every so often, especially the guys on the outside, and especially the cornerbacks? And with Jalen Ramsey not there, I think that's going to be an even bigger consideration. We'll see if Cam Smith, their second-round pick, takes that job, how it ends up shaking out. But just making life a little bit easier for those guys. And I think that somebody like Xavier Howard stands to benefit from that. So even if it's a transition, it's potentially a transition to a world that asks a little bit less of you, but the upside is just as high as a unit.
We talk about, like, with offensive line, how like boots can be a nice breather for the offensive line.
That's
like,
exactly. Yep.
For the defense, it's cover 6, cover 2 for that corner. That can be really nice. Hey, I'm just going to sit in this coverage. I just got to read the quarterback. Okay, hands. Okay, now eyes. Like it's a let more, maybe a little mental where they have to look, but physically they can take a little breather there. So it's a great point. And Ramsey getting hurt stinks. And I really wanted to see him, especially with this defense. So hopefully he comes back later in the year. But just even looking at what they're doing right now, I think that's exactly it. I think you're going to see exactly what Fangio runs, the cover 6 stuff where one side's going to be clouded, and that's going to help out whoever has to play corner outside, like whoever has to play corner, no matter who, backup or starters. It's just going to help them live a little bit easier and let them win up front and let them just a lot of smart players, let them be smart as opposed to like getting mentally taxed throughout a whole game.
Holland mentioned to me that he ran a very similar system in college with Andy Avalos at Oregon.
Oregon,
kind of ideas, so that he feels comfortable with a lot of the stuff. And he played the slot there, so he had to know even more than he does as a safety. So that's just one. All right, maybe he picks us up a little bit quicker because of his background.
That makes a lot of sense.
But the Xavier Howard move, they drafted Cam Smith in the second round, and I think that's with next year in mind, potentially moving on from Xavier Howard. That gets accelerated a little bit with Jalen Ramsey hurt. And Cam Smith was dinged up a little bit, but it kind of feels like they want him to eventually snag that job away from Eli Apple. All right. X factor for the Miami Dolphins. What do you got?
The Dolphins training staff. Whether it's offensive line, Tua, the receivers, getting Ramsey on the back on the field, it's whatever it may be. It's up to them. They got to get them onto the field, keep them on the field. What we can do, what training can we do, what load management can we do to get this team running? Because I like a lot of their starters, but it's like as soon as some guys start dropping off, you can say that about a lot of teams, but especially with this team, especially when you're looking at certain position groups. So I'm giving it to the training staff. That's what I'm going with.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. For me, we just talked about it. The number 2 corner, whoever ends up being the number 2 corner opposite Xavier Howard, that's what I'm going with because I feel very good about every other level of the defense. We didn't even talk about David Long being our linebacker now, who we absolutely love. So a lot of things to be excited about, but who locks down that number 2 corner spot? And then the nickel corner is also kind of a influx thing. At least when I was there, I haven't read any updates about it, but Kader Kohu played for them a little last year. Nick Needham, I think, is the presumptive starter at that spot, but he's been hurt. So a little uncertainty at those corner spots. So if they can figure those out, I have a lot of faith in Fangio and the staff to kind of let this defense hit the ground running.
And Emmanuel Ogbah. I'm going to throw Emmanuel Ogbah in there too up front. We haven't mentioned him. He's actually a good player too. Pretty good, pretty interesting team, man.
Breakout player for the 2023 Dolphins. Who you got for me?
It's got to be Jalen Phillips. He's on the cusp of stardom. He just, even statistically, eye test everything. He has pedigree anyway, so it shouldn't be a shocker. But he's
first round pick.
Yeah. He's living up to it, and a big time recruit. He's same amount of QB hits last year per pass rush snap as Zadarius Smith, Josh Sweat, and Myles Garrett. Pretty good list. Finished 15th in hurries per pass rush snap, and these are the players around him: is Ogbo Okoronkwo, my guy, Josh Allen, Khalil Mack, and Trey Hendrickson. So like this guy is already producing. It's just that he has to just get to that next step, and I think he's going to hit there. He's going to be fighting in that next time we talk about top 10 edges. He's going to be fighting as long as at least in that honorable mention list. Good player. It's going to ascend this year.
I have the same guy. I mean, we talked about it in the past. I think that he's going to have potentially like a double-digit sack season. Like if he had a dozen sacks this year, it wouldn't surprise me at all. One of those guys that when you see him in person, just looks different. Yeah. Like there are some guys that just look different. Myles Garrett is one of those people. Yeah. Where Aaron Donald is one of those guys. And I'm not saying that Jalen Phillips is on that level as a player, but when you stand next to him, it's like, holy shit. Like that guy is just put together in a different way. And he and I talked about this a little bit during training camp. Just, all right, you had this season, what does the next step look like? And he said, I've just won with athleticism and effort for most of my NFL career. My plan, and there was not a lot of refinement to it. I didn't know exactly how to string stuff together. Yeah. It's like now it's just about understanding what that looks like, how I'm sequencing certain moves. And I
love that answer.
And I think that's right. I mean, if you look at the way he's played, he lined up inside a lot last year. Yeah. So it's just, can you beat up guards because you're just better than them?
He's a big,
what does the next step for him look like?
There's the Bart Simpson, Lisa Simpson kind of clip where they're like, one of them's wheeling their hands, walking to the other, and the other one's kicking. They're like, we're ever going to have eyes closed. If I run into you, it's not my fault. Like, that's how he pass rushes. Yes. His arms going every direction.
And it was effective. And it works. What does the next step look like, I think, is the big question. Yeah. All right. What does success look like for the 2023 Dolphins?
I mean, with health luck, I think making the Final Four would be successful for them, obviously, but at least winning a playoff game. I think that is at least the bar for this team. They're all in. I mean, they got to take advantage of Tua's contract as well. So I think just this team's all in. They don't make a trade for Jalen Ramsey with anything else in mind. So at least a playoff win and possibly the Final Four, I think would be a huge success for this team.
I don't know the answer to this.
I know.
I think winning the division is probably it, right? Just because that would be a step forward. I think it probably involves Tua's future in some way. Like if you can get to the end of this season and you can feel good about betting on him, or maybe you don't, and you understand that maybe we have to go in a different direction just because of health concerns.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's some combination of like understanding your quarterback future and then maybe winning a playoff game, whatever that quarter, or maybe getting to the playoffs, winning the division. So this is a messy one for me. I know they have a lot of ambitions, but I think that next year they're still going to have a lot of these pieces. So it's not like this is make or break in the way that it is for a team like the Jets, maybe. So it's not quite to the same level, but there's definitely a sense of urgency. There's no doubt about that.